So today's discussion video is a video that I had wanted to talk about for a long time. Is the Clone Wars Legacy Reels important to the Star Wars Expanded Universe or to Legends? Does it fit? Is it important to have on the timeline? Now, this is an interesting kind of multifaceted question, but I wanted to talk about it because I don't see a lot of EU fans talking about the Reels, which I think is interesting because a lot of people will discredit them and just kind of not stick them in either timeline. Not stick them in Disney canon or really into the EU or Legends. But I think they have a spot in the EU if you consider TCW part of the EU, that is. So I wanted to talk a bit about that today. So the Clone Wars Legacy Reels, what were they? They were the last half of Season 6 that went unfinished because the show was being cut off and canceled. Of course, later Disney would go and revive it for a Season 7 that is exclusively a part of the Disney canon timeline. It is not part of the EU in any way, shape, or form. But that being said, kind of concepts from it were originally going to be in the EU timeline in addition to being in the Legends timeline as well. So, the Clone Wars Legacy Reels consisted of the Crystal Crisis of Utapau arc, which was 4 episodes, and it additionally focused on the Bad Batch arc of episodes, right? Yes, that Bad Batch. So, what's interesting about it is this was originally planned to be a part of Season 6 when it was cut off. And so this was included on the Lost Missions Blu-ray. Now, I don't believe it's included as a bonus section on the Lost Missions DVD, but it's available on the Lost Missions Blu-ray set so that you can get these episodes via physical media. These episodes were released unfinished with, shall we say, rough animation. They don't look the best. The characters won't really blink. Their mouths won't move. They'll just walk around as like the basic models. So they're really not touched up. They're not polished at all. But they're serviceable still. They have voice acting. They move around. They perform the episode for the Legacy Reels. And we have this as various content. They used to be up on YouTube, but they got taken down eventually. I think they were on StarWars.com as well. And for the longest time, they were marked as only Legends on Wikipedia. It's not marked as that now, but for a long time it was just marked as Legends. So they came out just a couple of months after the discontinuation. I think anywhere from 6 months to a year, somewhere after that they were released. But just because they were released after discontinuation doesn't mean they're necessarily part of Disney canon, because as we know, a ton of stories have come out for the EU after discontinuation. Marvel 108. SWTOR stories, Fantasy Flight Games source books, unpublished media. There's been a whole slew of stuff released both by Disney for the Expanded Universe and released independently for the Expanded Universe after discontinuation. So just because something releases after discontinuation doesn't mean it's necessarily not a part of the EU/Legends. So the Clone Wars Legacy Reels were released online and in the Lost Missions Blu-ray bonus features so that you could watch the entirety of the Crystal Crisis of Utapau arc and the Bad Batch arc. Now, there's a reason why I think the Bad Batch arc should be considered in the EU Legends timeline and not just in the Disney canon timeline. It's the fact that it resolves the question of what happened to Echo. So we saw Echo's helmet via the Citadel arc, but we don't see what happens to the clone trooper Echo until the Bad Batch arc, which revives him and shows that he was not dead, that he had been captured, and now he is recaptured by the Bad Batch. What's also cool about it is that the Bad Batch then, it means that they were part of the EU Legends timeline. The Bad Batch are popular characters. There's no doubt about it. And so it's cool to think that they were originally intended to be part of the EU Legends timeline. With these arcs and these unfinished reels are proof of that. When the Disney canon, I've not seen Season 7 of the Clone Wars, but they, from what I understand, polished up the episodes. I don't know how much changes were made, but I would say that you can't really take the Season 7 first half of the season with the Bad Batch arc that was finished for Season 7 of TCW. You can't put that in the EU Legends if there's any changes that have been made to it since then, other than just an updation for animation. But you can take the original arc in its unfinished state via the reels that were released and consider them to be a part of the EU/Legends timeline. I believe it finishes Echo's story, which is kind of pivotal as a plot point for that character arc. It gives closure to it. So I think that that's reason enough to consider it as a part of it. Additionally, the Crystal Crisis of Utopia arc is really cool, and it's got a unique position. It is really the only TCW arc that isn't part of the Disney canon that's part of the EU. They never remade it with new animation. So that means it's not part of the Disney timeline. It's not part of the Disney Star Wars canon timeline, as far as I know, because they never finished it. But it was intended for the EU Legends timeline before discontinuation, and then the unfinished reels were released. So this means this is a EU Legends exclusive TCW arc from a certain point of view, which I think is very fascinating. So it's kind of cool. It's a good arc. I actually like it quite a bit. There's a Toydarian character in there. It's pretty cool. And what's interesting about it is it introduces a Jedi that we've never seen or heard of before who dies in the episode. So it has some stakes to it as well, which I'd argue is pretty cool. It's not every day that a Jedi dies or perishes. So it makes it an interesting arc, and an arc that I think is worthy of the EU/Legends timeline. So the unfinished version of the Bad Batch arc and the EU exclusive Crystal Crisis on Utapau arc, I'd say fit into the EU Legends timeline. I'd say they matter. I think it's really cool. I'm always of the opinion that the more the better when it comes to Star Wars. I take Abel G. Pena's approach of being a maximalist. So I want to fit everything I can into the timeline. Everything possible. The unpublished stuff. All of that stuff. I really like to keep it on the timeline and try to figure out a way to keep it cohesive and keep it working. And so that's why I think these episodes really fit. First of all, they were intended to be released in the EU Legends timeline for Season 6. Second of all, they were billed on Wikipedia for years as being Legends because they weren't touched on in the Disney canon at all. So that meant that they were really in a unique position of being EU-only arcs for a while until the Bad Batch arc was finished. Crystal Crisis on Utapau wasn't, so it's still pretty much a Legends-exclusive TCW arc when you consider it. And thirdly, it gives closure to Echo's story for the EU. And fourthly, again, like I've been saying, an EU-exclusive arc with the TCW Crystal Crisis on Utapau arc. Additionally, since it was released in the Lost Missions bonus features for Blu-ray, we can safely assume that it's part of the Legends EU timeline, as Season 6 is. Now, there will be people who are saying, well, TCW doesn't really fit with the EU timeline. And you're right, there are contradictions. It's hard to wrinkle out. Leland Chee said that after the show, they were going to work on retcons to make it all fit seamlessly together. I would have really liked to see how that can happen, but I trust the man. The man never let us down before. So I would have been really interested to see how exactly they were going to fit with retcons to make sure that TCW fit with the EU. I would have been really interested to see how they were going to do that. I would have been really stoked to see it because I like to be a maximalist. I grew up with the show. So while I didn't like it as much after I read the Republic comics, there was still some value there to me. So I would love to use the maximalist approach, fit everything together. And I think that if we do take seasons 1 to 6 of TCW in the EU Legends, as Lucasfilm told us, as we know to be the case, it is a part of that timeline, despite the inconsistencies it creates. And so the legacy reels should be accounted for. And I don't see a lot of EU Legends fans talking about the legacy reels. I don't see really a lot of people talking about the legacy reels at all. And I think it's important to consider that we have extra content there with those. And we have an exclusive arc, which is really, really cool. So that's my opinion on the Clone Wars legacy reels. What do you guys think of them? Let me know in the comments. They're pretty fun watches. They're decent. You can watch them even despite the kind of rough stage they're in, and they're pretty cool. And I think it's kind of important that we embrace all the content that we have. While there's no content coming out for the EU Legends, it's important not to forget about any stone that we had. Make sure to turn over every stone for content we have, because it could be a while until we see more. But until then, we have a lot to enjoy. See you guys next time.